The summer sun beat down intensely as I reluctantly packed my bags for a week-long business trip. I accepted my parents' invitation for a long family vacation at a seaside cottage, although I had some reservations. I wanted to escape my mundane work routine, but I was also apprehensive about spending so much time with my family. However, the deciding factor was my sister Sarah's commitment to the trip. I had some reservations about the week-long family vacation at the seaside cottage, but I was eager to reconnect with my sister Sarah, who had not been in our lives for some time. I had not seen her since she left for university, and our relationship had changed. I had some concerns about the trip, but I decided to go. It had been some time since I had last been in contact with Sarah. I was eager to reconnect, and I reflected on how our relationship had changed since she left for university. We had gone from regular communication to infrequent text messages and social media interactions. I considered calling her, but I hesitated because I didn't have her current number. The drive to the cottage was long and uneventful. I spent most of it I was preoccupied with contemplating potential changes in Sarah during our time apart as I arrived at the quaint beachside property. The first day at the cottage passed without Sarah's arrival, and I attempted to distract myself by exploring the nearby beach and feeling the sand between my toes. As we arrived at the quaint beachside property, I found myself contemplating the changes that might have occurred in Sarah's life during our separation. The initial day at the cottage passed without Sarah's arrival, and I sought to occupy myself by exploring the nearby beach. I felt the warm sand between my toes and the salty breeze on my skin as I reclined on the sand, eyes closed and arms crossed over my chest. I must admit that the change of scenery was quite pleasant. The sun's warmth seeped into my skin, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned office I had grown accustomed to. I must have dozed off, because when I awoke, I was enjoying the warm sand and salty breeze as I reclined on the beach, eyes closed and arms crossed over my chest. I must admit that the change of scenery was pleasant. The sun's warmth seeped into my skin, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned office I had grown accustomed to. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, a familiar voice jolted me awake. Sarah had arrived, announcing her presence with a string of colorful expletives as she stumbled over a rock. I kept my eyes closed, listening to her approach and feeling a smile hug my lips. Some things, it seemed, never change. Sarah plopped down beside me, complaining. I was suddenly awoken by a familiar voice. Sarah had arrived, announcing her presence with a string of colorful expletives as she stumbled over a rock. I kept my eyes closed, listening to her approach and feeling a smile tug at my lips. Some things never change. Sarah plopped down beside me, complaining about the lone rock on an otherwise pristine beach. I couldn't help but fall back into our old patterns of playful banter. We exchanged quips about her girly feet and her lack of foresight in going barefoot on a beach. It felt good, familiar, like slipping into a favorite old sweater. When I finally opened my eyes and looked around, I realized that Sarah had been right. I was reminded of my sister's transformation from a gangly teenager into a beautiful young woman. Her mature features and confidence had grown, and I found myself staring a moment too long before catching myself. Our conversation drifted to catch up on our lives, and Sarah asked about Emma. My sister and I were talking about our lives, and I noticed that she had changed a lot since we last saw each other. She had grown into a beautiful young woman. Her features had matured, and her confidence had grown. I found myself staring at her for a moment too long, but then I caught myself. Our conversation turned to our lives and the people we know. Sarah asked about Emma, my ex-girlfriend, but I realized that we had broken up. I felt bad, because I hadn't told our parents about the split. I didn't want my mother to try to set me up with someone, even though she meant well. As I explained the situation to Sarah, I was grateful for her understanding and support. We started talking about relationships, and that made me think. I'd never had trouble attracting girls, but I had always had a hard time keeping a long-term relationship. I was grateful for Sarah's understanding and support. I explained the situation to her, and we had a moment of introspection. I'd never had trouble attracting girls, but maintaining long-term relationships had always been a challenge for me. I realized that Sarah was one of the few people I could truly be myself around without the pressure of trying to be constantly agreeable. Our conversation was cut short when Sarah announced her intention to go for a swim. As she stood and removed her shirt, I was caught off guard by the revealing blue bikini she wore underneath. My eyes lingered longer than they should have, and I found myself making a sarcastic comment about her choice of swimwear to mask my discomfort. Sarah's roar was quick. Sarah's eyes held a certain inscrutability, prompting me to question her motivations in selecting the bikini. I swiftly dismissed the notion, admonishing myself for even entertaining such a thought. Sarah proceeded into the water, and I followed suit, partially to cool off and partially to prolong our time together. The water felt refreshingly cool against my sun-warmed skin, momentarily distracting me from the complex thoughts racing through my mind. Sarah swam out deeper before turning back. Sarah's wet hair slicked back, and her skin glistened in the sunlight as she commented on how nice the water felt. I found myself struggling to maintain eye contact, my gaze drawn to the curves of her body beneath the surface. I felt a rush of heat that had nothing to do with the sun. I abruptly turned and headed back to shore. Sarah called after me, her voice confused and a hint of hurt. I paused, trying to gather my thoughts and explain my sudden retreat without revealing the inappropriate thoughts that had spurred it. When Sarah caught from my perspective, her proximity only exacerbated my internal conflict. She misinterpreted my discomfort as anger, and I found myself reassuring her that she had done nothing wrong. At that moment, Sarah made a confession that was deeply shocking. In a soft voice, she admitted that she had chosen the bikini to elicit a reaction from me. She spoke of noticing my physique, a feeling conflicted about her attraction to her own brother. Her words simultaneously relieved and terrified me as I realized that the conflicting feelings I had been experiencing were not one-dimensional. The tension between us was palpable as we stood on the beach, the waves lapping at our feet and the sun beating down on our shoulders. I struggled to find the right words to respond. I was torn between the taboo nature of our mutual attraction and the undeniable pull I felt towards her. I attempted to lighten the mood by making a joke about our unusualness, which led to a brief moment of physical interaction. Sarah sat on my stomach, which momentarily incapacitated me. I was keenly aware of every point of contact between our bodies. Our conversation continued in a familiar manner, using words that now seemed to carry a different significance. I made a humorous remark about our respective eccentricities, which alleviated the tension and led to a light-hearted physical interaction. Sarah sat on my stomach, which momentarily incapacitated me. I was keenly aware of every point of contact between our bodies. Our conversation continued in a familiar manner, but with new undertones. When Sarah adjusted her position, I found myself having to suggest that she move away. My body betrayed my attempts at maintaining a brotherly demeanor. As we made our way back to the cottage, an unspoken agreement seemed to hang in the air between us. We both knew that something had fundamentally changed in our relationship, but neither of us was ready to fully confront what that meant. The rest of the day passed in a blur of family activities and stolen glances. Our parents, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension between their children, chatted happily about their plans. This past week, Sarah and I engaged in a series of activities, including conversation and games, with a heightened awareness of each other's presence. As evening fell, we retired to our respective rooms. I found myself unable to sleep, my mind preoccupied with thoughts of Sarah, replaying our interactions on the beach and imagining scenarios that both excited and terrified me. I tossed and turned all night, unable to find solace from the warm summer night. After several hours of restless sleep, I made a decision that would irrevocably change the course of our relationship. With a sense of urgency, I proceeded to Sarah's room, carefully considering my actions. Standing outside her door, I paused to reflect on my actions, my hand on the doorknob. I was keenly aware of the line I was about to cross, and the soft sound of her breathing from within the room added to this awareness. With a heavy heart, I made my way to Sarah's room, hesitating just outside the door. I stood there, torn, and my hand was on the doorknob, ready to knock. I heard the soft sound of her breathing from within the room. After a moment, I turned the doorknob and found it unlocked. I pushed the door open slightly and whispered, "Are you awake?" There was no response. I paused, and the moonlight streaming through her window illuminated her sleeping form and her dark hair. After a brief pause, I turned the doorknob and entered the room, finding it unlocked. "Sarah, are you awake?" I whispered, pushing the door open slightly. There was no response, and the moonlight streaming through her window illuminated her dark hair on the pillow. I knew I should turn back. Observing her sleep like this was a violation of her privacy. However, I found myself drawn to her bedside, unable to tear my gaze away. Minutes passed as I stood there grappling with my conflicting emotions. I heard a voice in my head telling me to leave, while another part of me wanted to stay and be close to her. Finally, I lowered myself onto the bed beside her, telling myself that just lying next to her wouldn't be so bad. Almost immediately, Sarah's voice broke the silence, and my heart nearly stopped. "Sarah, you startled me." She turned to face me, a playful glint in her eye. I was intrigued to see her reaction if she thought I was asleep. I defended myself, insisting I hadn't done anything while she was sleeping. However, her next question caught me off guard. "Sarah, you frightened me." She turned to face me, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I wanted to see what you'd do if you thought I was asleep." "Obviously, nothing interesting." I defended myself, insisting I wouldn't have done anything while she was sleeping. Her next question, however, caught me off guard. Now that you know I'm awake, the implications of her question hung heavy in the air between us. I struggled to form a coherent response. My mind raced with the possibilities her words presented. "I don't know." I finally admitted. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness. Her touch sent shivers through me. Given my current state of awareness, the implications of her question lingered in the atmosphere between us. I grappled to formulate a coherent response, as my mind was inundated with the possibilities her words suggested. "I'm not sure," I eventually conceded. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness, and her touch elicited a shiver down my spine. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "Do you feel what you're doing to me?" I nodded, unable to articulate. The tension between us had reached a breaking point, and all the reasons why we shouldn't proceed seemed to dissipate. Our lips met in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. "Do you feel it?" she inquired, her voice barely audible. "I feel what we're doing," I replied, my voice equally subdued. The tension between us had reached a crescendo, and the rationalizations we had previously employed to justify our actions seemed irrelevant in that moment. Our lips met in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. For years, we had harbored repressed feelings, and in that moment, they erupted. The following night was one of exploration and discovery, as we meticulously mapped each other's bodies with our hands and lips. The taboo nature of our actions only served to intensify the passion between us. In the back of my mind, after years of repressed feelings, they finally found expression in a single moment. The following night was one of exploration and discovery, as we mapped out each other's bodies with curious hands and eager lips. The taboo nature of our actions only seemed to heighten the intensity of our passion. In the back of my mind, I knew we would have to face the consequences of this night. However, in the moment, nothing else mattered but Sarah. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, we lay tangled in each other's arms. Our breathing slowly returned to normal. Sarah's head rested on my chest, her hair tickling my. We were aware that our actions would have consequences, but at that moment, our immediate concern was for Sarah. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the window, we lay tangled in each other's arms, our breathing slowly returning to normal. Sarah's head rested on my chest, her hair tickling my skin. We began to process the reality of what we had done, which brought with it a wave of conflicting emotions. "Sarah, I need to talk about this," I said. "We need more time," she said softly. "I know," I said, pulling her closer. We lay in silence, each lost in our own thoughts about what the future held for us. When we finally did talk, it was a conversation filled with raw honesty and vulnerable admissions. We spoke of the attraction we'd felt for years, the shame and confusion that came with it. I acknowledged the feelings and concerns regarding the potential implications for our relationship and family. Sarah admitted addressing one of the immediate concerns. I informed her that I have been taking birth control for some time. Despite the gravity of our situation, Sarah's pragmatic perspective brought a smile to my face. She playfully swatted my arm, but her expression quickly turned serious. "What are we going to do?" she asked. It was a question without an easy answer. We both knew that what had happened between us was socially unacceptable and illegal, yet the depth of our relationship was also evident. Emotions were undeniable. I acknowledged this, but I am certain that I do not wish to lose you, not once more. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I do not wish to lose you either, but how can we possibly make this work?" We spent the following hours discussing our options, evaluating the risks and consequences of pursuing a relationship versus returning to being merely siblings. Neither option was without its challenges. As the sounds of our parents stirring in the kitchen below reached us, we realized our time alone was coming to an end. Sarah quickly got dressed and left to take a shower while I discreetly returned to my room, my mind still processing the events of the night. The remainder of the vacation unfolded in a series of fleeting moments and discreet glances directed towards our parents. It appeared that we had merely reignited our sibling bond, devoting more time to each other and engaging in light-hearted banter. I returned to my room, my thoughts still occupied with the events of the previous night. The remainder of the vacation proceeded in a state of flux, characterized by furtive moments and discreet glances directed towards our parents. Our interactions appeared to be indicative of a renewed connection between us, characterized by increased time spent in each other's company and the exchange of light-hearted banter. However, beneath the surface, a current of tension and desire ran between us. On the night of our departure from the cottage, our parents retired early to prepare for the subsequent drive home. Sarah and I found ourselves alone on the beach. The moon hung low over the water, casting a silvery path across the waves. As our parents retired early to prepare for the drive home the next day, Sarah and I found ourselves alone on the beach. The moon hung low over the water, casting a silvery path across the waves. "I don't want this week to end," Sarah said softly. Her hand found mine in the sand, and I squeezed her hand gently. "Me neither," I replied, "but we can't hide away here forever." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture that could appear innocent to any onlookers, but held so much more meaning for us. "I don't want this week to end," Sarah said softly, her hand finding mine in the sand. I squeezed her hand gently. "Me neither," she replied, "but we can't hide away here forever." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a gesture that could appear innocent to any onlooker, but held so much more meaning for us. What happens when we go back to our real lives? It was a question we'd both been avoiding. The bubble of our vacation was about to burst, forcing us to confront the reality of our situation. "We stay in touch," I said firmly. "No more letting months go by without talking. We figure this out together, day by day." We had been avoiding the issue, but it was inevitable that we would have to address it after our vacation. We decided to maintain communication, and I assured her that we would talk on a regular basis. Sarah nodded in agreement, and I replied with a kiss as we sat on the beach. The future was uncertain, but we were open to the possibilities. I realized that this week had changed us both irrevocably. Our bond was always strong, but it had deepened due to our shared passion and secrets. We would endure any challenges that lay ahead. The next day, we drove home, and Sarah and I exchanged phone numbers. We proceeded directly, eliminating the need for our mother to serve as an intermediary. In the ensuing weeks and months, we navigated the intricacies of our new relationship. There were moments of uncertainty, periods when feelings of guilt and fear threatened to overwhelm us. However, there were also moments of pure joy, characterized by a profound sense of connection. We learned to balance our romantic feelings with the sibling bond we had always shared, creating a unique relationship that defied easy categorization. The process was not without challenges, and we recognized that if our secret were to come to light, we would face judgment. We had the potential to lose everything. However, as we lay together one night almost a year after that fateful vacation, I knew that I would not change a thing, no matter the outcome. Sarah had become not just my sister and my lover, but also my best friend, my confidant, and my partner in every sense of the word. As I drifted off to sleep, Sarah was warm beside me, a comforting presence. I reflected on how a reluctant agreement to a family vacation had led to the most profound and unexpected journey of my life. It wasn't conventional or easy, but it was ours, and in the end, that was all that mattered.